All right, we might as well get started. You're going to watch the people joining, Cece, for me?
Yes,
Thank you.
I will. Thank you, Deb.
Hello, everyone. My name is Deb Hodgson. For those of you who don't know me, I'm with New Hampshire for Safe Technology. I'm a co-founder along with Jen White and Lori Schreier. And my journey here started years ago, 2017. I'll make this quick because Cece's the one who has all the really good information for you, but I had dry eyes and tinnitus, couldn't sleep, insomnia, heart arrhythmia. I was getting lost in my own town. I couldn't find words. I was having all sorts of issues. And I did my own research and I realized that wireless can thicken the blood. And I was on blood thinners at the time, had dry eyes and wanted to go on fish oil and couldn't. Fast forwarding, I decided to ground, get rid of all the wireless, and to my surprise, all my other symptoms disappeared. Who knew? And so at that time, I had been doing a lot of reading and I came across this book, EMF Off, which really challenged me to step way outside my comfort zone and speak publicly about it, as I knew everyone would think I was a lunatic. And during my journey, I met Cece at a Generation Zapped screening. She was a speaker, and we have been working together ever since. And in doing these webinars, it's our hope that we are helping the New Hampshire Commission with all the work they've done in educating you and giving you strategies on how to help yourself and make good choices. And with that, here's Cece Doucette. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you so much, Deb. It's really been such an honor to work with you and with Jen and with Lori and everybody else in New Hampshire. And what Deb didn't get a chance to say is that she is the impetus behind that amazing bill that we'll cover in a few minutes in New Hampshire, where for the first time in the United States, a government actually stopped and looked at the wireless issue. And we've got some great news to report on that. I'm going to go ahead and do a screen share with you. It should pop up in a sec. Deb, can you give me a nod when you can see that? Okay. So these slides that I'm going to share with folks today will be available in a day or two when we get the video recording uploaded and can send the link out to you along with the slides. So please feel free to use anything in these slides as a launch point for yourself to do your own investigation. We like to tell people, don't take our word on any of this. Get to know it for yourself so you can speak to it. And so anything with a line under it in the slides, you'll be able to pop in and perhaps if it's something you're interested, learn a little bit more about it. So this MTPW after my name simply means that I was fortunate enough to earn a master's in technical and professional writing at Northeastern University. Never in a million years did I imagine this is what I'd be using my skill set for. My undergrad was in communication studies. So I'm grateful that I have that kind of expertise under my belt to be able to use these skills to help people get through what this crazy issue is with wireless radiation, and most importantly, get to solutions to help yourself, your loved ones, and your communities. So I first learned about this when a friend of mine who's an engineer tipped me off that there could be something up biologically with wireless. And so I thought, I'd spent 8 years bringing wireless into my children's schools here in Ashland, Massachusetts. And I'll tell you, it was not an easy conversation to start with my schools, but I started looking at the peer-reviewed science and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is bad. And we'll walk through the science in a minute. And so I kind of raised my hand at school and said, I think we have a problem here. And again, not an easy conversation to have because the industry got in way ahead of us and started promoting their 21st century classrooms. So our schools had already been investing in wireless solutions. So, but once our school began to investigate, we became the first in the United States way back in 2014 to even have this little sign hanging in our classrooms with best practices for mobile devices. Turn things off when you're not using them. Turn the Wi-Fi on, like the access points, the routers, only turn those on for the shortest amount of time you can get away with. And always place a radiating device away from your body. So that's how I got involved in this. And then I kept thinking, somebody's got to have our backs on this. And when I was leading the Education Foundation, I served alongside our Senate President, Karen Spilka. And so I went to Senator Spilka and I said, you know, Karen, look what I'm finding. Look at this science that's showing harm to children, harm to the environment, harm to you and I. And I measured the radiation coming off of her cell phone and her district director's laptop. And both devices went way off the charts with radiation. And she's looking at me like, really? I'm like, yeah. And nobody knows. Is there something from where you sit where we could at least give the public the right to know and the right to choose, like we ultimately did with tobacco and with alcohol and gambling and pornography and drugs? At least if we know there's an issue, then we can have a right to choose. So Senator Spilka put me with an attorney in her office back in 2014. And in 2015, we introduced the first commission bill in the nation to get the right minds at the state level together to look at this issue and then decide what to do. And since then, I've worked on legislation for additional bills in Massachusetts and testified in New Hampshire and helped them with the inroads they've been making there. On this crazy journey, I was introduced to some folks in Europe who recognize that we can't fix it until we know about it. And so they invited me in, Brett and Lynn West, invited me into a project they were doing. And ultimately, along with one of the world's leading EMF or electromagnetic field scientists in Finland, Dr. Mikko Ahonen, the four of us built a little nonprofit called Wireless Education, where we literally have an off-the-shelf course that can be taken in about a half an hour online to train mature students, schools, families, and workforces, literally in about a half an hour online. So, you know, my mom, bless her, always taught us when we were growing up. I'm the youngest of 10 children, and she was a single parent. So she couldn't be everywhere all at once. So she always taught us, if you identify a problem, do your very best to be part of the solution. So we're all about solutions. We know this is a big issue, but we also know there are so many amazing solutions at the ready today, like this online course that your entire school district could take in about a half an hour. So then somebody called me up, Patricia Burke called me up one day because she knew about my bill with Senator Spilka and told me there was a panel of world leading experts coming to our state house in Massachusetts. And I hung up feeling like a kid in a candy store because for 2 years, I was the only person I knew who could talk about this issue. And at that point, I wasn't really even sure what I was talking about. So I went to the State House and it was a standing room only presentation by world leading experts on wireless radiation and biological effects. And from that day on, I was able to connect with others from around the state who also knew about this issue. And ultimately, we founded Massachusetts for Safe Technology. So I welcome anybody to go out to Massachusetts for Safe Technology. On our resources page, you'll find link after link to the science around this. On our state efforts page, you'll find important inroads with the Department of Education, with the Department of Health and Human Services, the Department of Public Health, as well as our legislature and some other groundbreaking efforts that are happening. And then somebody down at the National Institutes of Health found my work and asked if I would co-chair the technology panel for the Health in Buildings Roundtable Conference at the National Institutes of Health. And I was so honored, and we built out our panel. We had Frank Clegg, who's the retired president of Microsoft Canada, who figured out when he retired that wireless is not safe. And he has founded Canadians for Safe Technology. So he's out there doing what we're trying to do here in the US to get their parliament to pay attention to this. So he talks about the business perspective that if given a nudge, industry can absolutely do better, but they're making it hand over fist with their current model. So it's up to you and I at the local and at the state level to provide that impetus for industry to do better. Also on this panel was Dr. Martin Pall, P-A-L-L. And Dr. Pall is one of the foremost expert scientists on this issue. And we also had Peter Sullivan, who's a philanthropist, and he used to be a fighter pilot, you know, think Top Gun. So he was up there inside the planes with all the instrumentation radiating, plus the radar on the outside of the plane, plus all of the natural electromagnetic radiation that's up there when you're flying around in the planes. Peter got really sick. And both of his sons, when they came in through this preschool years, both of his boys wound up on the autism spectrum. So I invited Peter to come speak with us at the NIH because when I watched one of his lectures, he said that he did what most parents of autistic children will do, and that's to go to a clean organic diet to remove as much of the heavy metals from the body as you can. He said today, he tells families, first line of defense, do a digital detox. Neither one of Peter's sons are currently on the autism spectrum, and they are now grown men leading very productive lives. And I didn't even know anybody could come off of the autism spectrum. And it depends on where it came from. If there's de novo mutations that didn't come from mom or dad, if you clean up the environment, you may very well fully recover, or in many cases, improve significantly. So Peter came on our panel, and then we also had Theodora Scorato, who's the executive director of the Environmental Health Trust, which is arguably the world's largest database on the wireless radiation issue. They have policies from all over the world, what other countries are doing. They have the science, they have the medicine, and so much more. So what an honor it was to co-chair this panel. And why I like this link in particular is that we were limited to 10 minutes each. So if you need a very quick, highly credible resource to share with others, these short videos from the National Institutes of Health are very useful for that. And then when I fell down the rabbit hole, one of the biggest gaps we had is that so many people are getting very, very sick from wireless radiation, but they have no idea to connect the dots that this could be, like in Deb's case, what made her so very ill. So it's been amazing to watch the experts come together from around the world and build out medical conferences. This one is called the EMF Medical Conference, Electromagnetic Fields. That means these spikes of microwave and other man-made forms of radiation that are coming off of today's technology, unless we simply learn a little bit on how to have great technology, but without radiating ourselves with electromagnetic fields. So you will hear other terms such as RF, which is radio frequency radiation. You will hear microwave radiation because this is microwave radiation that's pulsating out of all of our wireless devices. So those terms can somewhat be loosely used interchangeably. There are also lower levels of electromagnetic fields that come off of, for example, the wiring in our homes or off of appliances that for some people can cause some health complications as well. So we have so many great resources to share with you today. And please know that this medical conference, although it was convened in 2021, that was right when the pandemic was getting thicker and thicker. So we had to pivot and go to an online platform, which turns out to be a blessing because it has been fully accredited for 24.5 continuing medical education credits for doctors and the separate set of accreditation for nurses. First responders, firefighters need to get continuing education credits too. So we ask you all, once you've gotten your heads around this issue, to please quickly take this information to your medical teams, because I do not know of another medical conference being planned, and these take years to pull together. This professional training is available to those who register by June 15th and complete the training online by July 1st. So please share that amazing opportunity with the healthcare practitioners in your life. So how did my schools ultimately become the first in the nation to have our little sign with precautionary measures? Well, I think it was when they read the fine print that comes with all of our devices. Anybody with us today who has an iPhone, I invite you to take that out and go into settings. If you don't have an iPhone, if you type in on a search the make and model of your own devices and then put in RF exposure, you'll be able to see the fine print that's been buried in there all along. Our friends at Environmental Health Trust also have a web page called See the Fine Print, and you can go in and see what some of the other devices are saying. Look at what was in the Apple iPads disclaimer: seizures, blackouts, eye strain. I personally have met people with family members whose children had their first seizures while sitting there on an iPad or a tablet. So this is pretty serious stuff. So in an iPhone, once you're in settings, scroll down just a bit and hit general. On a super old phone, it used to be you would next hit about, but most folks have been talked into upgrading their phone. So from general, scroll all the way down to legal and regulatory. And you can remember the acronym GAL, like this gal at this forum today taught you how to find the fine print. So from legal and regulatory, on the next menu, about 4 down, you'll see RF exposure. Again, this is radio frequency radiation that they politely call energy in this fine print disclaimer. When we read it, it tells us a couple of really important things. One, this device was tested at a distance from the body. So don't tuck it in your bra. Don't put it in your waistband. Don't put it in your back pocket. Or you may exceed the Federal Communications Commission's public radiation exposure limits. And as we'll discuss in a little bit, those were never biologically safety tested. They're only based on how much heat from a device would it take to raise the temperature of your skin. And as we'll see when we look at the science, it has very little to do with heat before the harm begins. So we have public radiation exposure limits through the FCC way up here. The science is showing us the harm is happening at hundreds of thousands of times below what the FCC still allows today. So in a subsequent paragraph in that legal fine print, it also says if you're concerned about this, use a hands-free option like speakerphone or a headset. And if you use a headset, you might want to look for one that's a hollow tube or an air tube headset. And what that means, and I'll show you. I'll come out of my screen share for just a minute here to show you what these hollow tube or air tube headsets look like. So much like a doctor's stethoscope that uses literally a rubber tube up to the ear, that's what these hollow tube headsets are like too. You see up at the tip, there's no metal because you don't want to put metal up to your head because metal amplifies radiation. So if there's ambient Wi-Fi waves going around your head, you're going to be drawing them right to your brain. They also have these things that are called ferrite beads that block the radiation from traveling up the wire that you've got plugged into your radiating device. Okay. So if you have to use a radiating device, create as much distance as you can, and a long headset like this will allow you to. So look for a hollow tube or a air tube headset. And so I mentioned that when I met with Senator Karen Spilka, I measured the radiation coming from her device. So in my home, you know, and like everybody, I circled my tail for quite some time before I finally said, whew, I'm the mom. It's my job to keep my family safe. And so I finally stopped circling my tail. And one by one, I figured out what was radiating in my home. And I've turned off the microwave radiation as best I can. I still get a tiny bit of bleed through from the digital electric meters that are mounted on the far side of my house, and occasionally from a car passing by, or my neighbor's Wi-Fi routers can sometimes be beaconing in my direction. But right now in my home, the reading that keeps me in the green is right now at 6. And the unit of measurement is something called a microwatt per square meter. So basically within like 3 feet of air, how much radiation is there? Right now I'm at 6. The science wants us to be at 10 or less in our living spaces. So we're doing pretty good in my house with 6. Now, knowing what I know, I simply forward any cell phone calls to my landline, and then I can keep my phone in airplane mode all the time. But I want to give you an example and a demonstration of what happens when I take my cell phone out of airplane mode and I expose myself to the radiation, right? So I'm not doing anything. See how it's up in the, bright flashing red? This is what our cells feel all the time, unless we know better. So I'm going to put my phone back in airplane mode, right? See, it starts going quiet, it's dissipating, and now I'm back down at the green. But let me tell you what that exposure was. Science wants us to be under 10 microwatts per square meter. We were at 6. I turned on my phone, and I don't know that you can actually see the numbers, but I'll read them to you. We went to 1,250,000 microwatts per square meter. Over 1 million. I've seen this go up to over 2.5 million. And that tops this particular meter out. This is the meter that was recommended at the EMF medical conference, and doctors are now taking this into their medical practices, loaning it out to their patients, saying, go home, measure, figure out where your exposures are, and come back, and one by one we'll talk you through how to get there. So it's tough. We can fix this, but it takes a little time to do our investigation and to come back and say, okay, what's my first step? Maybe the first thing I want to do is create a sleep sanctuary so our bodies can do cell repair and regeneration at night. So let's go back to my screen share. And, like I said, my brain goes towards solutions. So I'm like, okay, I learned that there are radio frequency detection meters. I was the grant coordinator at that time for our public school district, and I knew that our town had a pot of money that they distributed grants out to the community. So I thought, why don't we get a grant to put one of these meters in the library and put one of these meters in our schools so we can start doing the data gathering and then do our gap analysis and figure out what we need to do to have safe technology. Sounded pretty simple to my little mind. Took me 3 grant cycles. The first time I submitted, our select board was like, oh, we really don't know what this is. Come back next time. Second time I come back, and I'm showing the science in my grant application. They're like, oh, this is probably more of a Board of Health issue. And I had already met with our health agent here, and he was around back in the 90s when the industry started putting cell towers in. And he said, yeah, they took us out to fancy dinners at the hotels. They wined us and dined us and said, by the way, if anybody has any qualms about a cell tower coming in, well, there's nothing you can do about it, because look at this Telecom Act of 1996 says you can't sue us. Well, guess who wrote the Telecom Act of 1996? The industry. So took me 3 tries. When my bill came up for public hearing back in 2016, I presented before the Massachusetts Joint Committee on Public Health. And as I was showing the science and showing the readings and showing our little sign from Ashland, I was looking into the eyes of the members of this committee, and I could tell that not one single person had any idea wireless is toxic. So I spent months and months and months going up to our state house and meeting individually with every committee member or their designee to teach them about this. So once I realized that they didn't know about this, I thought I better get in with my select board and start educating them one by one. And so one by one, I taught them the facts, and then I resubmitted my grant application. And they said, well, we're still not really sure about this, but we'll consider giving you funding for 1 meter to put on loan in the library if the library board of trustees agree to take this into circulation. And the reason I even got the idea to put a meter on loan in our library is when the energy industry was taking away all of our healthier incandescent light bulbs and replacing them with those swirly CFL light bulbs. Those throw off a lot of man-made dirty energy, dirty electricity, electromagnetic fields. They're not healthy at all for us. But as part of their marketing campaign, they put a kilowatt meter in a case in our public libraries that got barcoded, and you could take home that kilowatt meter, measure the amount of savings you're going to have from the incandescent bulbs to these CFLs, and think, great, I'm going to save money. So who wouldn't want to do that, right? Well, it's not healthy. So anyway, that's how I got the idea to even put a meter on loan in a library. And so I presented to the board of trustees at our library, and there were 5 members. One gentleman sat there with his arms folded the whole time and just thought this was all hogwash. Another couldn't wait to get this meter to take it home and measure what was going on in her house. And then a third woman said, you know, regardless of how we feel personally, the library is a conduit for information in our community, so I think we should take a vote. And they voted 4-1 to put this meter on loan in the library. And since then, I met a doctor at the first medical conference in 2019. Turns out she was from Newton, Massachusetts, and we went after a grant from the Cultural Council, and we put one of these devices on loan in her public library, and we did programming around it with the award-winning film Generation Zapped, and I'll show you more about that in a minute. And so others from around the country had said, we love that idea, and so others are putting them on loan in their libraries too. And fast forward to today, I did mine in 2016, so here we are now several years later. Most libraries today have a library collection of things. So it's not a stretch for our libraries to allocate some funding. Pittsfield in Massachusetts had Verizon put up a cell tower right on top of a neighborhood, whereby the children, the adults, and even the dogs all got really sick. Like the kids were vomiting in their beds. They were having skin rashes and headaches and nosebleeds. And they've been fighting this Verizon cell tower for 3 years now. And Pittsfield now has this one, the Safe and Sound Pro meter that I just did my demonstration on. So anybody in Pittsfield or the library system out in Western Massachusetts can take this out and go home and measure, and then one by one figure out what to do. So we're very grateful. My local cable station came to my home. We did a walkthrough and a 23-minute public service announcement to show what are common exposures, where should we be looking for this invisible toxin. And so this PSA can help a lot of people figure out what they should be looking at and how to remediate. So that's how my schools became the first in the nation, by looking at that legal fine print. That's often a good way to show others that, you know, when you bring up this conversation, they're going to be looking at you thinking, tinfoil hat, conspiracy theorist. But as soon as you show them that they've been warned in their own device for years, it shrinks it right back down to personal. So please use that if you can. Long-term effects. We'll take a look at that first with the science. So child and adult cancers. This National Toxicology Program study over here, the NTP, or National Toxicology Program, is the gold standard across the world for toxics research. And they started a study more than 2 decades ago that ran for almost 20 years when cell phones were the technology of the day, to see if it could be harmful. They had an unprecedented 3-day peer review at the National Institutes of Health with world-leading experts whose life's work is investigating microwave illnesses. They concluded in their final report clear evidence of cancerous tumors, DNA damage, and a host of other findings. Well, every time a good study comes out, the industry will get a hold of it and say, oh, that's just one study. You need many more studies to prove anything. Well, right on the heels of our study here in Italy, the Ramazzini Institute concluded another large study on cell towers on the base stations and concluded the same things that we found here: cancerous tumors, DNA damage, and more. So we don't need more science. We need an informed populace and public policy to protect us. When I was doing my investigation early on, I started reading the infertility studies, and I discovered that they've taken male human sperm, exposed it to a laptop with the antennas radiating, and it changed the DNA, which is our roadmap to grow a proper anything, from a child to a plant to an animal to any biome. So it changed the DNA, it slowed the motility of the sperm, and it caused apoptosis, or programmed cell death. It was killing off the sperm in just 4 hours of exposure to a laptop. And where does everybody keep their devices? On their laps, in their pockets, right next to their reproductive organs. So that was the day that I found my voice on this issue. And I thought, wow, I didn't know about this. Does anybody else know about this? So that was when I started speaking up to my schools, my legislators, my town. And then neurotoxicity. Look at what is happening in our society with anxiety, with depression, with autism, with ADD, with ADHD, with allergies, asthma. We are polluting the brain with microwave radiation. Dr. Hugh Taylor runs the OBGYN program at Yale Medical School. He has done some of the rodent studies, and he discovered that when he exposed the pregnant mice to radio frequency radiation, the pups came out bouncing off the walls of the cages, much like a child with ADD, ADHD. Dr. Martha Herbert founded the Autism Lab at Massachusetts General Hospital. She's a Harvard pediatric neurologist, and she sees huge connections between what we know happens with microwave radiation exposure and what is happening to the families in her care. Dr. Martin Paul, who I mentioned from our presentations at the NIH, he has culled the science on Alzheimer's, and where, like with cancers, Alzheimer's used to take decades to start showing the effects. Now he says we are seeing autism not just in 70 and 80-year-olds, but in Alzheimer's, 60-year-olds, 50-year-olds, 40-year-olds, 30-year-olds, and in some cases, even 20-year-olds are presenting with Alzheimer's early onset. So we know this is so hard to get our minds around because we've been sold on the convenience of our devices and we love our technology. So just bear in mind, the message is not no technology, it's safe technology. And so we're very grateful when well-respected groups also start figuring out what the wireless radiation issue is, just like the Environmental Working Group. As a mom, I learned about EWG first when they came out with their Dirty Dozen and Clean 15 lists regarding foods that have higher or lower amounts of pesticides. So I used to use that when I was shopping for my family. Now they have gotten funding to put a staff member, a PhD, on staff to take on the wireless issue. And you'll see that they have now come out with a number of public health fact sheets protecting kids from wireless radiation in schools and at home. And then they have another one here that talks about the central nervous system with the neurotoxicity. So great resources abound. And we have to bear in mind that there are especially vulnerable subpopulations, including the elderly, because as we age, our cognitive abilities naturally begin to decline, but we know this radiation is doing a number on our elderly too. Pregnant women and fetuses, because the cells are duplicating so quickly during those earliest months of development. And a pregnant woman's immune system is already vulnerable, and we know that this is an immunosuppressant as well. But children are especially vulnerable. Thank you to Dr. Om Gandhi, one of the research scientists in this area. He has done the modeling on the penetration of radiation into the brain of an adult, of a 10-year-old, and into a 5-year-old. So these models are heads tilted sideways, where the yellow dot is the ear, the phone is up to the ear. On you and I, it's penetrating into our brain about a third of the way. On a 10-year-old, about 3/4 of the way. And on a 5-year-old child, it's microwaving almost the entire brain. So it's your job and mine to protect our kids, especially. What does the science tell us from the short-term microwave sickness effects? So some people will recognize a lot of these symptoms, and the really good news is that you have control over certain exposures in your environment. And time and again, people come back and say, you know what, Cece, I didn't want to hear this, and I didn't want to know about this, and welcome to the club. But they listened and they looked and they did their research and took a chance and started turning things off at night. And look at the amazing results we can have. Please know that the Americans with Disabilities Act has long since 2002 recognized electromagnetic sensitivities. So if you need another credible resource, this is a good one to go to. But insomnia is huge today. So many people don't sleep well, including children and teenagers, and sleeping is what they've always done best. But what the science shows us is that this microwave radiation pulses at us. So the Earth pulses its own electromagnetic field. It pulses 7.83 times per second. That's called Schumann's resonance, and that's measured in hertz, 7.83 times. When we use our digital technology today in the megahertz range, that's 1,000,000 times per second. In the gigahertz range, that's 1,000,000,000 times per second. So we are, in a word, getting overpowered by these man-made frequencies. So in the wee hours of darkness, the pineal gland in our brain, and that's about as scientific as I'll get because I'm not a scientist, I'm a tech writer. The pineal gland in the brain releases melatonin as part of our circadian rhythm in the wee hours of darkness. Now, our brain is up against this man-made light energy form of microwave radiation, and the brain thinks the lights are on. So it's not properly releasing the melatonin that would go in and regulate our sleep, and melatonin also helps to clean up the daily debris from regular, cell breakdown, repair, regeneration. So the brain thinks the lights are on when we leave ourselves in this invisible pulsation of microwave radiation. And so we are really doing ourselves a big disservice by not turning that off, especially during the sleep hours. Stabbing, searing headaches, migraines that doctors can't figure out, nosebleeds, ear bleeds. So what another body of science is showing us is that our red blood cells are meant to be free-floating, bringing oxygen off to all of our organs and systems to keep us nice and healthy. These are electromagnetic fields of radiation that are causing our blood cells to glom together and magnetize instead of free floating. So we have this thing called the rouleau effect. And I remember it because when I was a kid, I used to love to eat that candy Rolos, which is a stack of caramel chocolates. Well, that's kind of what's happening to our blood. It's stacking up in this rouleau effect, and then it can't get to where it needs to go to oxygenate. So we have things like headaches, nosebleeds, ear bleeds, chronic fatigue, pain from unidentified sources. We also have little antennas in the surface of our skin, and they're very sensitive to these electromagnetic fields. And this whole pulsation of spiked erratic, hundreds and millions and billions of times per second. Oftentimes, one of the earlier onset symptoms is that they start getting rashes, or you put the phone to your head and you start getting the hot ear, or your hand starts to tingle. My pinky finger tingles. That's kind of my tell. So heating, flushing, burning of the skin. Heartbeats depending on your own body's biological proclivity, it could cause your heartbeat to go too fast, or in somebody else, it could cause it to go too slow. Cognitive impairment, as I mentioned, is huge. So there's another body of science that shows we have something called the blood-brain barrier. So we have this membrane to protect the brain. We also have a gut barrier to protect our gut from toxins. So now what's happening is this jackhammering of microwaves is opening up or permeating that blood-brain barrier. So now when the blood is taking toxins out of the body, they can take a turn and go into these sensitive areas. And we wonder why we have such rapidly increasing neurotoxic diseases today. One of the biggest heartaches at that EMF medical conference came from several of the presenters who said that if we don't get out in front of this and get out in front quick, we can expect to see much more of the societal outbreaks and breakdowns that we've been seeing with anger and behavior issues, mass shootings. In the pandemic, we assigned every child a wireless tablet and we sent them home with not one shred of safety training. And we have had stories here in Boston subsequent to that when the kids went back to school that kids were literally beating on each other with their Chromebooks, just losing it and whamming their classmates. And that happened at like 3 different schools here in Massachusetts. The effects of microwave radiation are cumulative in the body. So people might be feeling great today, and tomorrow they might wake up very, very ill. So it's to be taken seriously by everyone, whether you feel these symptoms today or not. So all of these things, again, people come back and say, I turned it off. I hardwired my house. And hardwiring is not rocket science, folks. On the back of your router, there's an Ethernet plug. Get an Ethernet cable, plug it in. And who knew you can buy little adapters, little $20, $30 adapters that allow you to plug in something like an iPhone. And then you can do all your computer work right safely on your device once you go in and turn off all the antennas. And we'll talk about that in a moment. So I want to mention that as bad as it is for you and I, it's not just us, it's every biological cell on the planet. And our disappearing pollinators, literally disappearing by the dozens, they are meant to be synchronized as well as the birds. All of our flying creatures are meant to be synchronized with the Earth's electromagnetic field that pulses so very gently. That's how they navigate. They have magnetite and other properties in their brains and their beaks that allows them to have this symbiotic relationship with the Earth that helps them to navigate. And now we've brought in this giant layer of electrosmog. And so our poor birds and bees and pollinators are, well, in some cases outright dying. When they tested 5G in The Hague in the Netherlands, birds literally dropped from the sky when those 5G millimeter waves and other waves came pulsating at them, dropped from the sky, either stunned or dead. But we know we have study after study showing what this is doing to the birds and the bees and mankind. But again, it's up to you and I to figure out how to bring this forward. And for those who are concerned about climate change or energy consumption, there was a Greenpeace analyst as far back as 2012 who indicated if the cloud were a country, it would be the 5th largest consumer of energy in the world. And that was 11 years ago. And look at everything else we've brought on board since then. So it's huge. It's heart-wrenching to go look at the Congo and other places where these human atrocities continue to happen to get us the minerals by the dozens that go into every one of our electronic devices. If we really understood the human toll, we would never let the industry talk us into the next shiny object without using our devices to their full useful life. So everything else is consuming all this energy, the data warehouses, all the networks, and our personal devices. Streaming consumes huge amounts of energy. Download it to your device, go into airplane mode, and enjoy whatever you want right on your device. But do not do this stuff in real time with the radiation going back and forth. Download it and then use it safely. Every time we send and receive, we're consuming energy. Every time we charge and recharge and recharge and recharge our devices, we're consuming energy. Just hardwire, folks. And then in the background, all these great zippy apps that, will make our lives fun, easy, whatever, healthy, whatever. We have to really take a hard look. What are we actually using? Get rid of all the ones you're not actually using. And then you choose when you want to do the updates. Do it from a hardwired connection. And then you're going to cut down your energy consumption as well. So that's all the bad news, right? When I was learning all of this, I'm just over here scratching my head going, surely somebody's got to have our backs on this. So why don't we know? Well, in 2015, Harvard Law School Center for Ethics came out with this amazing free online 59-page report called Captured Agency: How the Federal Communications Commission is Dominated by the Industries it Presumably Regulates. And you'll see they chose a revolving door as their graphic for this report, because that's what it's come down to. The heads of our federal agencies are very often straight from industry, and they are not there to protect your interests or mine. They are there to protect corporate interests. So I thought, oh, there is nobody at the federal level looking after us. So that was what helped me to pluck up the courage to do this kind of work today. Just recently in November, ProPublica came out with another really good article called How the FCC Shields Cell Phone Companies from Safety Concerns. So the FDA, as it turns out, commissioned that $30 million study that our own National Toxicology Program did and found clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage. Now, clear evidence is the highest of 5 categories they can assign. That should have triggered public policy to inform and protect the public. But what happened? There's a different gentleman in charge of the FDA's radiation area today than who originally commissioned that study. Today, it's Dr. Jeffrey Shuren, and Dr. Jeffrey Shuren went over to the FCC and said, we don't really believe that study. Keep doing what you're doing. And one might ask, what would ever possess Dr. Shuren to do that? Well, again, you don't even have to look very far to discover that he's married to a woman who's a partner in a law firm that represents big Wi-Fi, the wireless industry, and big pharma and big agra. And so conflicts of interest abound, sadly, all the way up to the World Health Organization. If you go out and do a cursory search on the World Health Organization, is Wi-Fi safe? You will find first sources, and perhaps only sources, that say, oh, it's kind of inconclusive, not to worry, maybe not. But what you wouldn't know, because it doesn't come up readily on a search, is that in 2011, they did an investigation. And at that time, there was enough evidence to show we should be worried about cancer. They classified as a group 2B possible human carcinogen. That's in the same category as lead, thalidomide, chloroform, and a whole host of other horrible chemicals. What was missing at the time were the animal studies. Now that we have that NTP study and the Ramazzini Institute study and a whole bunch of other science that's come forth since then, they are now reopening their investigation at the World Health Organization. But sadly, what we've come to learn is that there are 2 groups at the WHO. One is very heavily industry funded. The other is the actual highly qualified scientists and doctors who know microwave radiation, and they are calling for this to be reclassified as a group 1 human carcinogen. So there's a new investigation at the WHO. We think conflicts of interest may very well prevent the right true scientists and doctors from serving on that commission. But they're looking not only at cancers, but at infertility, at the impacts on children, at the impacts on the environment, at the impact causing electromagnetic illnesses. So that's underway right now. We're not holding our breaths because we've seen the corruption for far too long. But just know through the links in this, you can get to the World Health Organization pages that actually show somebody is trying to look at this. So that's all the bad news. Let's start looking forward and positive to say, okay, what can I do? Once I decide, and you'll need some time to digest, but once I decide I'm going to protect myself and my loved ones, where do I start? Start where you are. Go to the back of your router, find your Ethernet plugs in here, get a big long Ethernet cable and run it to wherever you do most of your technology in your home. I would suggest upgrading your Ethernet cable to a shielded cable. It's nothing fancy. It just means it's got a foil liner in there. Because as I mentioned earlier, there are other man-made forms of electromagnetic fields. In a commercial building, all of the electrical wiring has shielded cables, and that keeps that electric and magnetic field from pulsating out into your living space like 6 to 8 feet. So if you can, get the shielded Ethernet cables. Unfortunately, code does not require shielded cabling from the electrical wires in a residential property. But if you're going to start looking to do this right, get a shielded Ethernet cable. You can get something called an Ethernet switch, and they're little. They're just little boxes that pretty much serve as an extension cord or an extension box for electronics. So you can just plug in your main cable from your router and then get little Ethernet cables for as many devices as you have. And you can get these switches as big as you need them. In a classroom, you could get one with 30 ports on it. And then you can just buy these little adapters, right? Short money. None of this is going to really break the bank for most of us. And then you just plug everything in, and then you go in and you disable the wireless antennas. You want to look for the cellular data, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, locator, hotspot, and just turn them off. Don't just do airplane mode. Go into each one and make sure that they're all off, because some of them turn themselves back on. So you have to go in. The first step is to just hardwire. The second step is to turn off the antennas. And when I hardwired my home, and I use a corded landline at home, I got it pretty clean. And then I went down to my basement where the router was in my utility closet, and I measured, and that was way off the charts. So I called up, I had Verizon at the time, and I called them up and I said, I'm choosing hard wiring for faster speed, better reliability, and safety. And I said, how do I make that thing stop pulsating microwave radiation? They said, oh, that's easy. Go up to your computer. And I went, really? And they said, yeah, sit down and go into your computer. We'll give you your internet protocol or IP address. And they showed me how to get into my account online. And then I just had to go into wireless settings. And I learned that at the time, there were 2 antennas in that router. And one was at 2.4 gigahertz, one was at 5 gigahertz. I didn't really know what that meant, but they were radiating. So I just went off, apply. And I got a message saying, you realize you're cutting everybody's Wi-Fi off? And I went, yeah. And so I waited a minute, and then it dissipated, and I measured, and it was literally radio silence down there in my utility closet. So it's critically important to first hardwire, second, turn off all the antennas you can find, and third, measure. Because with 5G and the Internet of Things, they want to put a radiating antenna or multiple in everything that you buy, from baby monitors to baby diapers. There's a little thing you can pin onto your child's baby diaper so it will beep when your child soils itself. So you're going to sit there and radiate your baby so your cell phone can tell you you need to be paying attention to your kid and go change the diaper. I don't know. I think we've kind of lost our minds. But if you don't measure, then you have no way of knowing. So for example, my husband saw a better deal to switch over to Comcast, and he called him up and said, we like the offer that you're making, but if we switch to you, my wife's going to want to make sure that when you do the installations, you disable all of the radio frequency antennas in there. And the tech support group said, of course, we can do that. So the technician comes to the house. He spends, several hours changing all the boxes around our house. And I said, okay, just humor me. And I go down to the utility closet and I measure the new triple play box they put in for wireless, cable, and phone. And I measure and it sends my meter back off into the red zone. And I said, you turned off the 2.4 and the 5 gigahertz antennas, right? And he said, yeah. And I said, and somebody tipped me off that Comcast Xfinity is putting public hotspots inside the router in my home to throw signal out to the street so their customers can use my energy to keep a connection while they're driving by, which I think is illegal. It shouldn't be allowed. But anyway, I said, did you turn off the hotspot antennas? And he said, yeah. And I said, the 2.4 and the 5 gigahertz? And he said, yeah. And I said, okay, so if those 4 are off, why is this still sending my meter into the red zone? And he said, I don't know. So he fiddled around for a while. He called his help desk. They didn't know. He called his supervisor. He didn't know. He said, I'm going to come back tomorrow and I'm going to bring my supervisor. And I said, okay. And I had remembered being at the medical conference. I overheard Peter Sullivan talking to one of the building biologists, and they were talking about an additional antenna that was in the router. So I contacted Peter and I said, Peter, what was that 5th antenna? And he said, home security. Whether you have a wireless home security system or not, it can still be prepared to connect. So it's radiating. So I was like, you know what? A lot of these things do updates in the night. I don't want to risk that this is all going to get turned back on and start radiating my family again. So my husband was very gracious. He went down to the tech store and he picked up our own router that night. So the next day, when the technician and his supervisor came to my house, they had no answers. And I said, well, I think I figured it out. It's the home security antenna. And Peter had told me that the frontline tech support people know nothing about this. You have to ask for a tier 2 tech support person who gets you to an engineer. They can go in their system from their end and disable that antenna. And I'm like, I am not playing this game. So I said to the installer and his supervisor, I said, hey, as a show of good faith, would you just install my router that we bought? And they did. They were very gracious. They were grateful to learn about it. And so we can fix this. It can be complicated, but if you don't measure, you don't know if you got it all. So that's our word of advice. That meter that I showed you, the Safe and Sound Pro 2, as well as the Acoustimeter that we first put on loan in our library, they're on par. This one has a few more features. You can plug it in and leave it plugged in. So if you're electrosensitive, if somebody walks in your house and they've got something radiating, it'll go off and then they can fix that before they come in. So they're both about $400. For some people, that's not a problem. Others will go in with friends and loved ones and get one that they share amongst themselves. Others will ask their library to put one on loan, but measuring is really important. So we've pretty well covered the devices under our own control. You always want to turn off the antennas and hardwire where you can. The other sources of this radiation come from utility smart meters, from cell towers, and from 5G small cells. So we'll quickly go through some of this, and then we'll talk about additional solutions, and then we will open it up for Q&A at the end. So feel free to pop questions into the chat. So what's a smart meter? When I was a little girl playing hide and seek with, my 10 siblings and all the other kids in the neighborhood, I'd be hiding in the bushes. And it could be a while before I got found. So I just sit there and keep myself busy and watch the dials go around on the utility meters, be it gas, water, electric, and just kept myself entertained. Well, that used to be called an analog meter. It was a strictly mechanical device that measured how much of whatever source of water, gas, electric you're using. And then once a month, a reader would come through the neighborhood and get your readings, and that's how they did the billing. In more recent years, they have talked our towns into eliminating the cost of the neighborhood walkers if you go to a digital system. And so these digital meters measure your consumption, and they send that data packet off to the utility company to then do your billing. And if there's a break in service somewhere, then they would know that and be able to, come and do whatever they need to do to fix it. So it all sounds really good when it's proposed to our towns. What they have not disclosed is that so many people are getting sick because they're mounting these right on our homes. So look at this diagram here from our friend Josh Hart, who's been working on this for a very long time. When you mount one of these utility meters on the wall where somebody is spending time, perhaps a child, perhaps a pregnant woman, perhaps an elderly person, perhaps somebody with an existing health condition, or even a perfectly healthy person, within days or weeks or months, we get reports that people are getting very, very neurotoxically ill from this pulsation of microwave radiation. I testified with the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities, and I sat down on my dining room floor where we've got an electric meter and then a second electric meter for our solar system. And I just did a 30-second demonstration to find out how many times does this pulse microwave radiation. So I'm inside my house, it's outside. And when I did the math, it was pulsing 17,000 times a day. And we have, at the EMF medical conference, the physicians were saying when these smart meters go in, or heaven forbid, a bank of smart meters on a multi-unit dwelling like an apartment complex or a condominium, they see a great uptick in people presenting with microwave sickness symptoms. Remember how I said this radiation likes metal? It can also transfer right onto your house wiring or pipes, turning your whole home into a big giant antenna. There are far too many reports of fires and explosions from improper grounding. And for those who care about their security and data privacy, your data is flying through the air. Any hacker with a $100 application on their laptop in the car can be over there tapping into your data. They'll see your patterns. They'll know when you're home, when you're not home. They can just back up their truck and take your toys. So there are huge issues around these smart meters. And it's not playing out like the industry said, that it's going to save us energy, and it's not doing what they promised. It's also a huge environmental justice issue where these toxic industries bring their toxic products into these underprivileged, environmentally challenged communities, roll out their stuff and say, hey, it was great here, where nobody even knew to pick up their heads and look to see if we have a problem. And then they say, oh, now we're going to roll it out all across the state. Or, hey, look, in Worcester, Massachusetts, we rolled out the smart grid. Wasn't it so great? Hey, New York, hey, Rhode Island, hey, Connecticut, you guys should be doing this too. When in fact, in Worcester, they went way over budget, and they wanted to turn around and charge the ratepayers, us, to cover their costs for all their cost overruns. So our Attorney General's office got involved only from the economic viewpoint, and we've tried time and again to get them to take action on the human biological impacts as well. Jeremy Johnson was a Silicon Valley engineer. His wife is a medical doctor. Both he and his wife became very, very ill very suddenly. Nothing in her medical training could help her figure it out. And ultimately, they discovered it was a bank of smart meters that went in on their condo. So Jeremy did a TEDx talk that talks about the smart meters, and it's really good. He's such a peaceful man. But this is a good one to show to engineers and to physicists and to others who think, bah, it's fine because it doesn't do any heating. Well, Jeremy's talk is good. And I think I'll add another TED talk that's just come out with Dr. Alexia McKnight, who's a veterinarian radiologist, and she wound up with a smart meter on her home that made her very, very sick. And she just did a TED talk, and I was so honored when she reached out to me to say, hey, My children's school in Pennsylvania is looking for speakers on Health and Wellness Day. Will you join me to present? So we did 4 presentations at a school to teach safety to the teachers and the staff. So that was pretty cool. I'll add her talk to the slides as well. So that's the smart meters. The second source that you and I don't have any control over are these cell towers, or at least that's what the industry tells us we don't have any control. When I started researching all of this, I got in way over my head and I couldn't remember where to find good sources that I later wanted to share or reread. So being a tech writer, I just created a very simple research repository called Understanding EMFs, because I didn't understand what electromagnetic fields were. And then I just started categorizing the science. This came out of our military. This is radar. That's what this microwave radiation started as. So we have military studies that were done 50 years ago showing it's biologically harmful. You can read those here. But anyway, when we look at the science, it's critically important to focus only on the non-industry funded science, because the industry comes up with their own studies intentionally done under conditions that would show no harm or that would create doubt. So I started gathering up some of these, and they recommend that you should not have a cell tower within 500 meters or 1,640 feet of where anybody spends any time. The science shows, a new word I had to learn was epidemiology. That means what's actually happening, not in the lab. Those are the in vivo and in vitro studies that study what happens inside of an organism and what happens in a petri dish. But the epidemiology studies show what's actually happening in society. So when you look at the normal death rates and neurotoxicity rates, and then you look at cell towers, there's this curve that starts to happen where there's high incidence, and at about 500 meters or 1,640 feet, that neurotoxicity rate, insomnia, all the whole shebang, and death rate starts to come down at that 500 meter mark, but it doesn't actually catch up to regular population statistics till double that. So we're already at a halfway compromise with 500 meters, but at least it's a start. So look to the non-industry funded science. And many of us have discovered there's a website called antennasearch.com that tracks where all the big cell towers and all the big macro antennas are. These big antennas are called macro. You can type in your home address. You can type in your children's school address. You can type in your work address, and it will usually return a 3-mile radius of where all these antennas and towers are. So I put in the address of our state house when I was testifying down in Boston. And I put in 28 or 24 Beacon Street, and it gave me a 3-mile radius that shows 1,520 cell towers. That also reports 4,512 of these big antennas, whether they be on a tower or mounted on a building or behind a facade on a rooftop. That is a lot of electro pollution in a very, very tight area. So Boston and most of our big cities have become major toxic environments. Now we add on a whole additional layer of electropollution with 5G small cells. So what is this? 5G, any of these G's here stand for fifth generation technology. The industry is spinning it that we'll have faster entertainment downloads, smart cities, super highways. I never woke up and said, gee, I need to have something downloaded in 2 seconds instead of 8 seconds, right? They're creating this market demand. They're creating the demand for more capacity needs, which means they need more cell towers. Well, the signals that carry your current data back and forth are using longer waves for 3G and 4G technology. They pretty much maximized all the monetary gains for any new things with that. All that's left to monetize are these tiny little millimeter waves. And so that's why they're spinning it up. Yeah, these millimeter waves combined with all these other waves will help you to have faster speeds, right? But what they're not telling us is that these little millimeter waves are adding on to, not replacing. So we're adding on this whole other layer. And these millimeter waves are the same size as our poor little pollinators. And it's doing a number on them. But as they keep telling us we want faster downloads so we can stream, they're buying up the entertainment industry. That's why they want to encourage faster streaming so that we will buy their new products. But one of the problems is our current longer wavelengths can cruise their way right through the building and into your device inside your home. But these tiny little waves get derailed by objects in their path, like rain or snow or trees or buildings. So that's why they currently have to pair everything together to get your signal. So we see their goal is to put in millions of these small cell antennas at close range, because remember, their signal can't go far. They want to put them literally outside our bedroom windows, every 2 to 12 houses, right at the curb in the public, in our public access way for their commercial gain. And that's what 5G is. We see in community after community, they come in often under the dark of night and they just lop the trees so their signals can go by. And the kicker is, in a congressional hearing with the Commerce Committee in Washington, D.C., Senator Richard Blumenthal from Connecticut called out the industry and said, so please share with us, how much have you invested in independent scientific research to prove that this is safe before bringing it to market? And both the industry guys at the hearing kind of hemmed and hawed and then ultimately had to admit they don't know of any independent funding that they had put forth to see if this is even safe. So Senator Blumenthal says, so as far as health and safety is concerned, we're flying blind here. And that's it. And even Computer World and other trade magazines are reporting that 5G is a bad joke. It is not providing anything faster than the toxic 4G, 3G signals that we already had. But there goes Verizon last year, putting out a press release that we are bringing 5G to 100 million people in our cities, right? Right at the curb. And this is not a popular conversation to have as we come out of COVID-19. Some people will say, oh, COVID, it was caused by 5G. Well, that's not what the science is saying. What the science is saying is that when we have a pandemic, in science, we're supposed to look at 3 areas. You're supposed to look at the host, meaning you and I. You're supposed to look at the virus, COVID-19, and you're supposed to look at the environment for any confounders. We didn't do that with COVID-19. Our CDC did not take into account the environmental exposures that are already stressing our immune systems. So what Dr. Beverly Rubik and Dr. Rob Brown did was they went out and did an assessment, and I know Dr. Magda Havas and others have also looked at this, and they found evidence for a connection between COVID-19 and exposure to radio frequency from wireless communications, including 5G. And when we step back and use our common sense, our biological cells only have so much energy in them, which is pretty well calibrated to get us through our everyday cell repair, regeneration, bring our energy to where it needs to go. When you have this constant bombardment of microwave radiation, our bodies can't keep up with that. And then you introduce a virus on top of it, and we're already running on fumes. And now we're meant to fight off a virus that's as deadly as COVID turned out to be. Well, the statistics in this, statistically significant statistics in this report show that where 5G went in, there were statistically significant higher rates of COVID-19 and higher death rates of COVID-19. So we need to stop these 5G rollouts at close range and then learn how to take control of the devices that are already under our own control. Dr. Magda Havas was one of the co-chairs at the EMF Medical Conference. She retired from Trent University up in Canada, where she taught electromagnetism for decades. And she recognizes that our governments, by and large, have dropped the ball and are not monitoring this cumulative from all these many different exposures. So she has started the Global EMF Monitoring Project and invites anybody who wants to invest in one of these Safe and Sound Pro 2 meters to serve as citizen scientist volunteers and go out and measure in your community what is the ambient radiation out there. And then use a little clipboard form, get your data, enter it into her database, and then she rates everything black, red, amber, or green. She calls this her brag project. Can you brag about your community? The science tells us that if we can get it even under 1,000 outdoors, if you have it under 10 at home, your body can probably keep up with the cell repair and regeneration. So we have done some readings. I've gone out in many communities and done this. Others around the world are doing it too. And here are some common outdoor measurements. So one of our friends in New Hampshire went and measured at the fire department there. It was still in the green zone. In Keene, New Hampshire, ooh, getting into the yellow. Nashua, New Hampshire, right down the main strip, in the red zone. Concord, New Hampshire. This one Deb and I took during the pandemic, where there were very few cars driving by radiating. There were very few people on the street, and we were still in the red zone with 66,000. And then Stratham, New Hampshire, where Deb and Representative Patrick Abrami live, 108,000. There was a massive cell tower that went up right down their main drag. And then in the North End in Boston, what looked to be these pretty wrought iron street lamps right at the curb at public level, these are 5G small cell towers. And they are all the way down Hanover Street, which is our wonderful Italian section of Boston, where we have these beautiful restaurants and bakeries. But there are also people living at bedroom height right near these toxic cell towers. So this is real time. This is what's happening in our communities today, unless we learn to fix it. And Martin Luther King Jr. taught us that when we have important changes in our social norms, it comes through 3 areas. One, the public learns about this, which is our hope today that you'll take something away from this. Courts rule, and public policy eventually catches up. There's a lot going on in all of these areas. I won't go into terrible detail, but I will give you some pages that you can then go look at, and I'll call out some of the highlights. The FCC has been sued by the Environmental Health Trust and Children's Health Defense and a number of others that were combined. And the Ninth Circuit Court in Washington, D.C., Circuit Court of Appeals, was presented with 11,000 pages of evidence entered into the public record showing this is extraordinarily harmful. And they won that lawsuit, and the court remanded it back to the FCC to say, you need to do your homework, and you need to account for the impact on children, the impact on the environment, electrosensitivity, infertility, and more. So this lawsuit was won on Friday, the 13th of April in 2021, and the FCC has not done one thing to adhere to that court order. So it's got to come from you and I, and it's got to come from us empowering our towns and our state legislatures to speak up and do something. So lawsuits have been happening all over. In a groundbreaking move, I mentioned that Pittsfield cell tower with Verizon, where everybody has literally had to abandon their homes because they got so sick. For the first time, a board of health in the United States did an 18-month investigation, and they wrote a cease and desist order to get Verizon to come to the table and talk about this. And instead, Verizon went to the courts and got an injunction saying, we don't think that was legal for their board of health to do that. So now there's a citizen civil suit in Pittsfield that we expect will come to the courts on April 6th. But this cease and desist order is a really good document for you to use in your own town, because they document their findings when they investigated this with doctors and scientists, and then all the lies that the industry came in and told them. That's documented there too. So feel free to look around. These lawsuits are happening all over the US, they're happening all over the world, but we don't hear about it because the wireless industry, by and large, owns mainstream media, and they control the content of what you and I hear day to day on the radio and TV and in social media. But it's all here for you to look at. Public policy. So we have had more than 20 bills in Massachusetts over the last 8 to 10 years. And we've made some important inroads, but we've never passed a law. New Hampshire is the first to pass a law to investigate, and this is Deb's legislature because she, as a citizen, brought this issue to him. He's a really good public servant and an engineer, and he'd only been taught you have to have heat to have harm. He did his due diligence and had this major wow moment, like, wow, what are we doing here? He wrote this bill that we helped him with that put it these very pointed questions. Why do Lloyd's of London, Swiss Re, AM Best, and others, they long ago recognized this as a world-leading risk, and they put exclusions for radio frequency electromagnetic fields because they know the lawsuits are coming and they do not cover for damages. So that leaves our towns on the hook for legal liability if they allow this toxic technology in at close range. And then we talked about the legal fine print that comes in our devices. Why is the FCC dropping the ball on all of this? Why does our country allow 100 times more radiation exposure than certain other countries? And why is nobody looking at this cumulative effect? So even during the pandemic, they passed this law through the House, through the Senate, under the governor's pen, and they spent a year investigating this. And not only did they have highly qualified doctors, scientists, engineers, state agency representatives, they saved a couple seats at the table for the industry. So everybody gets to have their say, and then we get to decide what to do. 10-3, their commission members voted for their majority report that documents the corruption with our federal agencies, and it makes 15 recommendations to more responsibly site all this infrastructure and then to transition our homes and our schools to safe, hardwired technology connections. Dr. Kent Chamberlain at the time was the chairperson of the University of New Hampshire's Department of Computer and Electrical Engineering. And he was a 30-year lifer doing EMFs. And he thought this will be a slam dunk. Of course, it must be fine because we've all been doing this. Well, he got in there and started investigating, and he's done a complete 180. And he is now out there working with others to educate the public and to come up with engineered solutions that are safe. So he has a good 20-minute presentation on what the commission report is, and his slides are also available. So there have been other bills that have been introduced to try and start invoking some of their recommendations. I want to share with you this document that you can access here. It's short and it's from the retired president of Microsoft Canada. And one of the most important statements in there is that wireless technology is no longer advanced technology. It has outlived its useful life as a main source of connectivity. The main source today should be fiber first, fiber optics to and through the premises, and use wireless connections sparingly. So they have had a couple of bills. They have one that's in play right now that would reverse some of the stripping of local control that the industry has done in more than half of the United States. They got in and sweet talked their way into legislation that really limited control on what our towns can do. Seemingly, there are actually many things that our towns can do to protect ourselves, but the industry's only told them that there's nothing they can do, so they sit there like sitting ducks. So we have this bill in New Hampshire. We have a bunch of bills in Massachusetts this session. Connecticut now has a bill about small cells and smart meters, and in the last couple of weeks, we have just learned that there's a really good bill in Maine to investigate the environmental impact on our birds, bees, and pollinators, as well as children in schools. They had their hearing last week, and we are encouraged that the committee is interested in pursuing this further. So they'll have a working group meeting. And when I send out my slides, I'll be sure to include that new one as well. So you guys can scroll through this. The industry comes in and tells our towns one by one, oh, we're going to put up all these cell towers at close range. It's fine. They're safe. Nobody else cares. It's just the NIMBYs, the not in my backyards in your town. Nobody else cares about this, which again is not true. If you go here to our friends at Americans for Responsible Technology, you'll see there are over 150 groups all over the United States that are working so hard in their communities. And here's just in Massachusetts alone, a whole bunch of examples of successes that people are having, but they're told you have no choice. So people aren't even looking at this. And our towns are starting to take action too. The city of Boston has filed with the FCC. They joined a lawsuit with mayors all across the country. Burlington, Massachusetts came up with a small cell policy saying that if you come back, if we let you put these small cells in, first of all, our preference is that they go out into industrial areas and then commercial areas. We don't want them in our residential areas. So if you don't have zoning code in your town saying something like that, there's a shot clock. When the industry hands an application to your town, there's a shot clock that goes with this, and they have to respond within 60 days if they're going to put it on an existing structure, or 90 days if they want to put up a new antenna somewhere. And that's not enough time to update your local zoning bylaws. So you need to be proactive, and you need to take this to your town and say, I think we have a gap here that we could look at. And there are excellent samples from all over the country of towns that are already doing this successfully. And our friends at Americans for Responsible Technology have a template here. They've got a checklist for your town. Look at your local bylaws as they are today. Go through, does it have this? Does it have this? Does it have this? If not, here's some language. They have a sample code you can use. But tell your towns, don't be afraid to hire a good attorney, because most of our town attorneys are wonderful, but they do not have expertise to go up against the wireless industry. There are attorneys who used to work for industry until they figured out just what the game was. They switched teams and are now representing municipalities and citizens. So it's short money. Somebody like Andrew Campanelli will look at your particular zoning code, look at your particular state laws, and tell you how to beef up your zoning code so that it will be as strong as it can be to protect you until the FCC does what it's been mandated to do. But other towns are already doing it, and there's lots of good examples here. So I love this. In Easton, Connecticut, a grandmother figured out what 5G was. She took it to her local board. One of their board members was a medical doctor. It didn't take him long to figure out what the biological implications were. And they put a moratorium on 5G until it can be proven safe through independent scientific investigation. And then they just re-upped that moratorium in the last year. Hawaii County put a ban on 5G. It didn't have any legal teeth, but it sure brought this issue front and center. And these kinds of actions are happening all over the world. Please know that our schools have become a very sick environment for our children. If you go and you talk to your school nurses, I was at a conference once and I described the headaches, the nosebleeds, the nausea, the dizziness, the anxiety, the depression, the suicidal ideation, the inability to concentrate, the brain fog, the cognitive impairment, the acting out, the anger. Those are all microwave sickness symptoms. She said, you just described what I go through every day at school. She was a school nurse with both the children and the adults in the building. So the New York Times did a series of expose articles saying that Silicon Valley executives send their children to schools with no technology, not wireless, not hardwired. They know a child's brain doesn't develop best in front of a screen. It develops through meaningful interactions with trusted adults, with their peers, with the natural environment. And so they even go so far as to have their nannies sign contracts that there will be no screens around their children. And yet they push that 21st century classroom into our children's schools. But, you know, for every problem, there's a solution. And our friends, Patty and Doug Wood, have their nonprofit Grassroots Environmental Education. That Americans for Responsible Technology program that we talked about is one of their projects. And they have also come up with their Tech Safe Schools program. You can write to them, give them the names of the administrators in your district. They will send a packet out on your behalf to the administrators to get the ball rolling. And out at their website, they keep it very simple. Here are the biological risks, here are the legal risks, and here's how to remediate. So it's all there, and they want to help you get your schools talking about this. And then a group of folks volunteered their time with the Massachusetts Breast Cancer Coalition, and they have come up with curriculum K through 12 to go ahead and teach this, how to use technology safely at age-appropriate curriculum levels. And then this professional development here is the actual video and slides that Dr. Lexi McKnight and I did in her children's school. So use all these resources, you know, send them one at a time, keep planting the seeds, keep following up with your schools, because this is going to be new for most of them too. And then we can literally train your entire school district in about a half an hour online. We have something called our Robin Hood model. If there's a socially responsible corporate citizen in your town and they license the course to train their own employees, we will let them designate a local school and we'll donate the licensing. And it's not to break the bank. I mean, it's like the cost of a movie ticket to take this little course. And we'll do bulk for the schools. We can do sliding scales. We just need to cover our costs and create a win-win for the community, for the corporate sponsors, and for the schools. So we're trying to help you at every turn. Our friends at the Environmental Health Trust have an incredible database of all these flyers, brochures, postcards you can get printed up from their website, as well as you can go dive into all the research there. It's really exciting that they have worked very hard with the state of Maryland, and their state agency for children has now become the first in the country to issue a fact sheet for schools and home recommending hardwired technology. So feel free to check this out and share it with your schools too. And then the U.S. Collaborative for High Performance Schools is one of these organizations that rates schools on how green they are. And with great thanks to Dr. Tony Stein, she worked with them to get a module on low EMF best practices that can be shared with any school that's doing new construction or remodels. That's the time to get the Ethernet plugs back in and get all the devices running to them. So many good resources. Here's something that was written by the Mediterranean country of Cyprus. When the pandemic hit, they've got study at home recommendations, which we should have done here in the United States, to say, hardwire those Chromebooks, turn the antennas off. And if for some reason you can't hardwire, download your stuff, turn off the antennas, and keep as much distance from the radiating routers and boosters as you can. So Professional Solutions, again, this medical conference is only available until June 15th registration. So please, please get your doctors, nurses, and firefighters and all your other counselors. Give this to them. We have a letter at Massachusetts for Safe Technology on our events page that you can print right out and give to your healthcare practitioners at school and in your own personal life. Dr. Cindy Russell, Dr. Joel Moskowitz, and others founded Physicians for Safe Technology, which is a highly credible website for doctors and other healthcare practitioners to go get the information. All sorts of resources for physicists, technologists, architects. We just need to help start the conversation with everybody. And then many people are do-it-yourselfers, many people aren't. There's an entire profession called building biologists who go through a very stringent training program to be able to come into your home and take measurements of mold, airborne toxins, water toxins, and many are getting their training now to be able to come in and measure for radio frequency and other forms of electromagnetic fields. So feel free to hire somebody to do that. This is that award-winning film, Generation Zapped. Best documentary by the Women's Independent Film Festival. It was included in the United Nations Film Festival. 74 minutes. It's now available on Amazon Prime and other easy to get to places. This is a great thing to sit down with your loved ones or the grandparents in your community or the parents of the kids your kids hang out with, and just sit down and watch it together. Sometimes I'm brought in to do a talk afterwards to catch up with what happened since this was rolled out in 2017-18 till today. But look at all this, even PBS, Bert Wolf has 2 episodes. And then Americans for Responsible Technology has a whole toolkit for you to go in and talk to your towns with, to give flyers to your neighbors, to do a meeting, maybe do a Generation Zap screening in your community. And, you know, we've been sold on all Wi-Fi all the time. And I think we're all recognizing that it's not healthy. And so it's important to set limits for ourselves and for our children, because they are big fans of monkey see, monkey do. Whatever they see that you're doing, you're inadvertently giving them permission to do the same thing. So be mindful, model good behavior. And then I love this poster. You can print it out here, 50 ways to take a break. It just reminds us what we used to do with our time before we stood in the shallows of our screens. So lots of fun things to do on there. And then there's a phenomenon called earthing or grounding. There's a huge body of science behind it. Elite athletes use this. It's so simple. It just means connect to the earth again, because electrons come up from the earth that help to regulate our own circuitry, right? But now we walk around on rubber-soled shoes that the electrons can't get through. Our cars are on rubber-tired, vehicles that the healing energy can't get through. We don't sleep on the ground anymore. So The Earth Prescription is a book by a medical doctor, Laura Conover, and she talks us through all 4 seasons on how we can just ground naturally, even when we can't be out walking on the ground, right? Here in the Northeast, I know I can't walk outside barefoot for 6 months of the year, but I can wear fingerless gloves. And as I go for my walks, I can touch the pine needles, I can touch the leaves, or I can pet a dog that's on the ground. And if I rub their snout or their ears, I am automatically grounded through the plants that have a higher water content and through the pets. So many ways to get that good, clean, healing energy. So that's a great resource. And then what can we do to help our towns? The CDC already has something called the ALARA principle, which stands for as low as reasonably achievable. That's our goal. We're not saying no technology. Let's get to as low as reasonably achievable. And they already have this web page here on the CDC for ionizing radiation, which can break the atom, but the same principles apply to non-ionizing, non-thermal radiation. They say spend as little time being as exposed as you can, create as much distance as you possibly can, and if you can't get away from it, then you should be shielding. And all this applies to man-made wireless radiation too. So great resources. This is my page for municipal leaders at Understanding EMFs. And if you go to Massachusetts for Safe Technology, on the resource page, I just linked all of my pages off to that. So you can always follow the breadcrumbs and get there. But it's really important to teach our towns that today, we need to differentiate the industry's priority of commerce versus the public's priority of great access and public health. So this free online resource is called Reinventing Wires, the Future of Landlines and Networks. And it takes us through more than a dozen reasons why it's a really bad idea to let the industry talk our towns into installing any more wireless equipment, especially at close range. So we get far faster speeds with fiber or high-speed cable right to the premises, far more reliable. We don't have to compete for all of the wireless signaling, which the industry is trying to tell us. That's why you need 5G, because we have capacity demands. Well, that's all solved when you hardwire to and through the premises, and our privacy and our data are so much better protected through fiber optics or high-speed cable. So when we do this, we always have to measure against the biological numbers, not the numbers that the FCC has, because those limits don't protect anybody. Okay, so next steps. We have to be honest with ourselves, just like with alcoholism or drug addiction, we have to admit we have a problem here. There is no safe level of man-made radio frequency radiation in the scientific literature. Once we know it's a carcinogen, every amount of it is potentially carcinogenic. Dr. Linda Birnbaum recently retired as one of our government heads. She led up the National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences, which oversees the National Toxicology Program. And she knows that there are pretty corrupted agencies up there, but she also knows that there are some really good people still in our federal agencies. She said, before we're going to see meaningful actions from the feds, it's going to have to bubble up from you and I at the local level up to the state level, and then put pressure on the feds. So lots of good inroads are happening there, but we cannot wait for somebody else to fix this for us. So we have to educate the public. Please keep inviting everybody to these sessions that we're doing. I can be brought in, others can be brought in to do forums in your town. You can go poke around and see what we've done here. After this one at Hanscom Area Town Select Board, which is a consortium of 4 towns, 3 of those towns went and adopted the Burlington, Massachusetts small cell policy and then improved upon it. So great resources for everybody. But please, let's just get with our schools and get this figured out, because to have 50% of children today with a chronic illness, that is not only sad, it's unacceptable. When we know that if we remove environmental toxins, many of those children tonight could be feeling better. So start where you are. What do you do for a living? What professional organizations do you belong to or have access to? Can you bring me in to give a presentation to your workforce? Let's get it going. We're here to help. So our town should be, technology is here to stay. Every town should be forming a townwide tech safety committee. They should be alerted that we should not be letting these smart meters in. And if we are, we need to hold those companies accountable for giving people the right to opt out of them. And then just start transitioning to everything hardwired as the first choice. So again, if your bylaws are not protecting you today, nobody's protecting you. So it's up to you and I, and we'll come with you. We'll come help. Our friends at Americans for Responsible Technology, they'll come with you. They'll come help. They'll zoom in. So, and don't be afraid to hire an attorney. None of us ever anticipated we'd have to open up our family pocketbooks, but sometimes you have to weigh what's most important. But towns can hire them. Citizens can pool their money. They can do GoFundMe accounts to come in and rewrite your zoning bylaws. I think Andrew Campanelli charges like just shy of $9,000, which for a town is not that much money. So for today, start thinking about where your exposures are, and one by one, what baby steps can you take to reduce your exposure? Just notice, start with baby steps. Above all, you might want to create a sleep sanctuary tonight to give your body that chance to repair. And then transition to Ethernet cables with adapters. Keep everything in airplane mode as often as you can, and only come out to send and receive for short amounts of time. And then, like I said, our friends at Environmental Health Trust have these incredible, really appealing flyers that you can just start using. You can post them up on your local bulletin boards, post my invitation for these weekly talks, or, we do them twice a month. Put them up at your library, put them up at your gym, take them down to town hall, find out where all your bulletin boards are, go to the senior center, and just start planting these seeds. And that's how we begin the conversation. So thank you so much. I will stop my sharing, but know you can reach us. New Hampshire for Safe Technology has this Facebook page, or if you don't do Facebook, reach out through email. I have a website, Massachusetts for Safe Technology. Feel free to pound around to see the science. what's going on at our state level, what's going on in our news stories. Every time somebody makes an inroad, we like to post the local news stories. That way, when you start the conversation and your town says, well, I've never heard of this, say, hey, look at this. Look at all these towns that are working on it. I think we should too. And then I have an events page where you can always come to find out when is the next safety talk, or are there other events, or how do I get to that medical conference? All of that is here at Massachusetts for Safe Technology, or just shoot me an email here. So I will stop here, and we've got about 15 minutes left. Deb, is there anything in the chat that we might be able to field?
There is. There are a few questions for you. They're from Peggy. She wanted to order some of your postcards to distribute and wanted to know if you could either say what the steps are or how she could go about ordering them. And then another question from her, if you could list the link for the half-hour mini course on wireless info.
Yes.
Not the link, the link.
The link.
If you just type in wirelesseducation.org, that will bring you there, and then you just click on the schools and families course. And we really appreciate it when people take those courses, because we have overhead costs, and we've been volunteering our time for quite some time. We paid out of pocket to get the course engine built and all that. So we do have to charge something. It's nominal though. So we really appreciate everybody who takes that course. And then I'm going to go to Massachusetts for Safe Technology. And show you the events page. Okay. Deb, can you see this?
I can, yes.
Okay, so this is what our events page looks like. And you can always just click on this and you can print it out. And they'll give you a PDF file that you can then share or email to other people. We do a monthly meeting. It's not an education session, it's a meeting of the minds where people come from all over. And we talk about what's happening with the legislature, what's happening in real time in our towns, and we learn from each other and we get inspired by each other, and we talk about events that are coming up. But here's where you can always come register for our public education events too. So register to join us monthly at our monthly meeting, our working meeting. Anybody can come, and then come down here and register to come to any of our training sessions. And then if you just want to be on my list, folks can sign up here. We always have prior webinars. If the times don't work for you, you can just go watch a previous one. And our slides are always posted in the description on the YouTube video. So, and then we've got some great highlights and stuff that you might find interesting. There's a really good forum coming up in Sheffield this week, actually. They have put something on a town warrant to say that until the FCC fulfills their mandate to fix the public radiation exposure limits, we want a moratorium on 5G in our town. So they're trying to put a restriction in there, and they're going to have it voted on at their town meeting. So they're doing a forum at their local library this week, Wednesday, that the public is welcome to physically go to. And then here's the EMF Medical Conference. So I wanted to share that here's the link. You can just print out and take it to your next doctor's appointment, dentist appointment, therapy appointment, whoever helps you keep your mind and body strong. Give them this and ask them to please go get trained, because so many people in their care are very likely suffering and they haven't caught it yet. And then firefighters also need continuing education credits. And here is a page, a document you can print off, because the International Association of Firefighters in 2004 had firefighters getting sick when cell towers were being put up too close to their fire stations. So they have a public policy statement here saying, we do not consent to these until it can be proven safe. Now, industry, I understand, has paid a lot of good money to get their cell towers put up near fire stations, or maybe they're donating $1 million fire engines. But this speaks volumes to our firefighters. So I have literally printed this out and handed it to our fire chief as well, our police chief as well. So use the resources we've got here. Here's where you can get information to order the Safe and Sound Pro 2 if you want. And right here is if you want to go to Dr. Magda Havis's website for global EMF monitoring and volunteer to be a citizen scientist. So please, please use the resources we've built. I was so flattered when somebody in California reached out and said, Cece, I love your website. Can we copy it? And I said, sure. So if anything we've done can save you time, we would be honored. And just so you know, just a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? Look at all these stories of towns in Massachusetts that are dealing with this issue. That this doesn't make it into mainstream media. The Boston Globe rarely covers this because their owner owns Fenway Park and the Red Sox, and they've got 5G all over Fenway Park. So this speaks volumes that there's so much being done when you go to share this with your town. Okay, I'll shut up now.
Okay, well, I think Peggy wanted to know how she could get your postcards to distribute.
Oh, darn it, Peggy, that's why I went there. Hang on.
I'll print it out myself. I'm just totally bamboozled when I go to that website. My head is spinning. So if you could even send me the final page.
Look, I'll get your head to stop spinning.
Okay.
Right here on our Take Action page.
Yeah.
You go down here and here's our information card.
Yeah, I've done that.
It's two-sided. So all you have to do is click on this and you can save this file to your computer.
But then when you go on their site, it's so confusing. It's like, what size do you want? It's just absolutely dazzling. And you have to print the image and
Okay.
Maybe I just have to get somebody to help me do that.
Yeah, I'll help you. You know where to find me.
Okay.
Okay. But hey, Peggy.
We have more questions too.
Okay, go ahead.
So Maureen asked if there are any local groups.
Local to where?
I'm not sure.
Maureen, where are you?
You can unmute yourself. Natick.
Yes. I'm right in Ashland. Maureen, send me an email at Massachusetts for Safe Technology, and I will hook you up with some other people that I've met in Natick. And we've actually met with I think the senior town planner there. And my dentist was dating somebody from Natick, and she mentioned the EMF thing to him, and he goes, oh, Cece Doucette, I know of her. And he was serving on one of their town boards. So there are people in Natick who are already aware of this, and I would love to join you to keep the conversation going.
There's another one here from Deborah D. And she said she's not in Massachusetts anymore, but what's the current status of smart meters? And can someone who has one installed opt out for an analog after the fact?
Here in Massachusetts, we have 2 energy companies primarily. There's Unitil also, but mostly it's National Grid and it's Eversource. National Grid does offer a fee-based opt-out. They may charge you like 70 or 80 bucks to come swap it out, and then they're going to charge you a monthly fee to get the reading. Eversource today does not offer an opt-out of any kind. We do have a bill in the legislature that would give people the right to have a no-fee opt-out. As a first step, we know the right solution is to just hardwire these units directly to the internet on your home or your office or school or whatever, and get rid of the radio frequency. But at least an opt-out would be a first step. And this session, for the first time, Senator Michael Moore, who has had this bill for a while, he's introducing that bill with an emergency preamble, saying this is a big public health issue. We need to get on this. So maybe it's been 10 years in Massachusetts that we've had a smart meter opt-out, or they call it a choice bill. Maybe this will be the session, but for now, I think you need to look at your own state and find out what town you're living in, or if you're looking to move somewhere, ask that question before you move if you're electrically sensitive. You know, what are our options with smart meters? Okay.
That's all I see in the chat.
Okay, then I would like to call on Peggy Barton to unmute herself. And tell me what you emailed me today or yesterday, Peg.
Oh, okay. I had a great success story. Thanks to you and all this information so far. And I have had Comcast for years, and I finally got my magical meter, my safe and sound meter, and I went up and measured it. And this is after the technician years ago said he had disconnected everything. It was transmitting over 3,300,000 microwatts per square meter. Millions. It was within inches of my head, within inches of my feet. I just freaked out. I put it on the other side of the room. I ran out of the room and I stopped using my computer. And I, meantime, called Verizon because I wanted to combine everything with one. It was a better deal. So they came and I said, look, this is what I'm doing. This is why I'm switching. I want every antenna turned off in that. Are you willing to do that? And he said yes. And he put the router in the basement and so supposedly disconnected or disabled everything. He left. I took my meter down. I held it up. It's 14,000, which isn't 3 million, but it's still not good. So I called the office the next day and I talked to a technician and he said, I don't understand that. He measured, he checked from his end. He said he turned off just the name of the wireless, whatever it is, the network, but he didn't turn off the wireless. So until you get that meter, you don't know what you can't trust anybody or what they say. He switched it off. It went down to 0. So I can now safely feel like I can be, because I've had Ethernet for ages, but meantime, I'm getting blasted from the router. So that was a thrill. And I feel so much safer. And I actually went into a public building a few days ago to watch a presentation, and I brought it with me. And the building itself was just radiating. And I just walked around a little and I found a corner that wasn't radiating as highly. So I think I'm going to be carrying that on my hip from now on. So it's just incredible to have that feeling of agency over your own environment a little bit. So thank you.
Oh, Peggy, we're so grateful. You know, you and I met at our local farmers market a number of years ago, and we started talking about this. So the fact that you have remediated your home and you've also started talking with your town, you've also started talking with your own loved ones, and that a couple of your brothers have come to one of these talks too. You know, this is how it's done. There's no knight in shining armor coming to rescue us.
Yeah, my brother in particular with the family and grandchildren, he was visiting and he said, I might have to buy one of these myself. So he's going back to Michigan and he's going to be hopefully affecting a whole extended family.
Good. If he wants, we have a lot of folks in Michigan who are tuned into this. So if he doesn't want to be a lone ranger, we can connect him with others in Michigan who are very active on this right now.
Thank you.
Pamela has her hand raised. Pamela.
Yes, hi. Thank you. Thank you so much for this presentation. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Just a couple of questions. So we have EverSource, and in our neighborhood, we have green boxes. All of our telephone wires and poles are underground. So I don't know how to tell. I mean, I know I could look on the side of my house and see if we have an analog meter or if we have the smart meter. But how prevalent are the smart meters at this point? I live in Hopkinton, by the way, right next to you. So.
Okay, they're quite prevalent. There's a slight distinction between a digital meter and a smart meter. The smart grid would have like a collection station somewhere in the neighborhood. So the radiation would come off of your device. It would be sending data to the next house that would then pick it up and send it to the next house and so on. So further down the line, you could be getting higher amounts of radiation on a smart grid. But some of those digital meters, well, all the digital meters are pulsing. Some of them are not on the grid yet. But what they did in Ashland, for example, is they got rid of the walker and they put the digital meter on, and then they have a truck that drives by once a month to beam their sensor at your meter on your your digital meter on your house. And that's how they pick up the data to be able to bill you with. So that's why I did the reading in my dining room, is I was like, if they're only coming for a reading once a month, what is this thing doing? And it was pulsating 17,000 times a day. Luckily, that's on a corner of our house where we don't spend much time and nobody's sleeping on the other side of the wall. But I still want those things off my house, but I'm in Eversource territory as well. Do you have any friends in Ashland?
I'm sure I do. I just have to think about it. Yes.
Yeah, think about it and then truck over to the Ashland Public Library with them if they have a library card, and they can take out the acoustimeter. And then you can go walk around with it and see what your exposures are and see what that box is that you've identified in your neighborhood. But
yeah.
yeah, so Pamela, if you can be sure you're on my mailing list. When Senator Moore's smart meter bill comes up for public hearing, we're going to ask people to send in a statement to support it. And you would be a perfect person because you can say, I want a choice. I want to not have a radiating device on my home.
Don't we have a choice between Eversource and National Grid?
No, they divvied up the state.
Oh,
Yeah,
gee.
I know.
I'll lend you my safe and sound meter if I live in Hopkinton too. I'll lend you mine.
Who is saying that?
Peggy Barton.
Oh, good. Let's find out a way to hook up.
Yeah, if you
Okay.
guys want to go into the chat,
Yeah.
you
Okay.
you can private message one another with your contact information, or just come through me and I can connect you guys.
So I'll go through your email. Thank you.
Okay.
I just had another question about those green boxes. I don't know if you know anything about what's in them, and
I'd say measure them. Until you measure, you just
Okay.
don't know.
And the last question is, do you know anything about solar panels and if those are dangerous in any way?
If I could defer, we have a building biologist with us today. Alistair, are you available to unmute and talk about solar systems? I know he came and went. Oh, here we go.
Yeah. Just a second. Hi, everybody. Yeah, Alistair here. Thanks. The question was about solar panels.
Yeah, what do you
So-
make of the solar panels?
Are we talking about on one's own property, on the house, or just
Yes.
an
On
array?
one's house. Mhm.
So, okay, well, so I'll start by saying the electric fields on your home wiring are not confined to the wire. They actually come out 6 to 8 feet from the walls, ceiling and floor as well. So you're exposed to electric fields from those. Ideally, that is it's oscillating at 60 hertz AC, alternating current from the grid. But what solar panels do is they have inverters where they take the DC electricity to AC, and basically it creates higher frequencies. I know this is a bit technical, but higher frequency harmonics. So that 60 hertz becomes 120, 180, 240, and higher. And what happens is your skin has a certain resistance to being to absorbing electricity. So very low frequencies and also low voltages won't get inside your body because your skin is protecting you. But inside of your body, it's kind of wet and electricity flows a lot better. And you know, your whole body is an electrical system, nerves and whatnot. So the higher frequencies that come from the inverter of solar panel systems makes it so that those electric fields can penetrate your body further. And so people will have often have side effects or experience symptoms of being in that electric field, more so when you have a solar panel system. That's dirty electricity in a nutshell. So solar panel systems create dirty electricity, affects your health. That's the short sort of thing.
Because they keep pushing these solar panels, and I don't have one, but I'm glad to know they're dirty electricity. They're not healthy. Solar panels.
Yeah.
You shouldn't have them on your house.
Well, like Cece has been suggesting from the beginning, there are safe ways to implement all these technologies. So there are ways that you can put in certain filters, or some solar panels are actually built to reduce this effect. So you have to be careful about how it's installed. You know, if you can put them away from the house instead of on the roof, it's even better. But it's a
So
long
Alistair,
conversation.
I know the Building Biology Institute has some free fact sheets that are very helpful, and I remember
Yeah.
that there is one on solar panels, so I just put in the chat a link to those free fact sheets. I didn't do just a solar panel one because there's so many good ones in there, like baby monitors and stuff too. So people can poke around there. And for anybody who's not familiar with working with the chat, you could either just click on that link and open up a new page on your own browser, or down at the very bottom of the chat, there's a little ellipse, the ... If you click on that, it will save the chat to your own device. So anything in the chat that you want to come back to would be there for you. Okay. So for those who live in the New England area, Alistair has been completing different levels of building biology certification. And we're very grateful because we have had a dearth of building biologists in the Northeast here. So we're just so excited. I got to meet Alistair out in Pittsfield, in Lenox and Hillsdale, New York. We did a program together out there. So if anybody's looking to hire somebody to come in and help, you can find Alistair through me as well. Or Alistair, if you want to drop your contact into the chat, that's fine too. Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments? Okay, everybody. Deb, thanks so much for staying with us and being our humble hostess with us today. Our next webinar is going to be at 6 p.m. on the 29th, I believe, of March. And again, people can register if they get on my mailing list, or if they just go out to our website. You can do it proactively that way. Okay, everybody. Have a tech safe day. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Cece.
Thank you. Thank
All
you,
right,
everyone.
bye-bye.
Thank you, Cece.
Thank you.